your microphones and the camera off. Then if you have any questions, you can ask our speaker after her presentation. I have great pleasure of welcoming Professor Andrea Melis. Andrea Melis is a professor of accounting at the University of Cagliari, Italy. He serves as a screening editor for corporate governance and international review and co-editor for the Journal of Management and Governance. He is author of the several articles in top academic journal in accounting, including British Accounting Review, Corporate Governance and International Review, European Accounting Review, and Journal of Business Ethics. Now we will start our seminar with Professor Andrea Melis.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for your invitation. It is a pleasure to talk in front of you. Well, although it would be even nicer if we were all in the same room, but given the situation, I think we should be happy to be able to do online seminars. Today, I will talk about new direction in corporate governance research. Can you see my slides? Mohammed?
Yes, we can.
Okay,
Yes.
good.
Yes.
First of all, I am an accounting professor, but I started researching and then teaching corporate governance since 20 years now. Just some very personal overview. Why am I going to give you this information of mine? Because this seminar will be very much a personal reflection, so will be biased, maybe opinionated, definitely not comprehensive, but it will be based upon my experience. So also we have some caveats on this presentation. I started working on corporate governance in 1988 when I did my master dissertation with Professor Mike Wright at University of Nottingham. He was, and at the time, one of the most important professors in the UK in corporate governance. I truly learned a lot. Before that, I have no idea what corporate governance was about. So that's where everything starts for me. In 1999, I published my first article on corporate governance in an Italian journal. And then in 2000, I published a very first article in International Academic Journal. I started my PhD by the time, the University of Rome, and then I also visited University of Birmingham and University of Florida in the United States. At the end, I did my PhD in accounting with a focus on corporate governance. So my corporate governance became my real research area. And in 2001, as I said, I had the opportunity to be a visiting scholar at the Corporate Governance Center at the University of Birmingham in the UK. The director at the time was Professor Chris Mullin, who was now is a very good friend of mine, but at the time was like, one of the big professors, editor of the very most important journal in corporate governance. And I was very happy to have the opportunity to be there and study there, talk to her at meetings, do some research with her. I continued to work on corporate governance, and in 2013, I was appointed screening editor of Corporate Governance International Review. Why do I say that? Because this gave me the incredible opportunity to have an idea of the trends in corporate governance research. I read about one academic paper every day, just as a screening editor, because I need to read the paper, evaluate the paper, and decide whether it should go to the editor-in-chief and to the reviewers or not. So it is a tough decision because, as you all know, especially those who are more experienced, there is always a lot of work in a paper when you submit to a journal. So I don't take it as very easy to say, no, I don't think it has enough contribution, methods, contribution to the theory, to the practice, so that it can go to the reviewers. But also gives me the incredible opportunity to basically read a great variety of papers sent to what is considered the most important corporate governance journal around the world, which is basically one every day. including Sundays. Okay, so you do see paper from everywhere in the world, from any methodology, from any topic, corporate governance related topic, from biodiversity, performance, accounting frauds, board composition, board process, whatever. In these 7 years and counting, because I'm still at that position, I did have basically opportunity to read about 2,000, 3,000 papers. It is a lot of time, but it is really a way to learn as well. 2020, in January, I was appointed as a co-editor of the Journal Management and Governance with a special topic on corporate governance. So basically work and together with the editor-in-chief to decide on and manage all the corporate governance related paper. And again, also here you have an opportunity to see a variety of papers. You may have papers from any country around the world, but that's an international journal, different settings, different ideas, different theories, agency theory, stewardship theories, stakeholder theories, and so on. So that's why I say what I'm going to say in this presentation will be based on this experience. So I don't expect it to be, please do not expect it to be comprehensive, because I don't have a crystal ball, so I cannot predict the future, okay? But what I can say is, from my experience and from my daily work, which are the trends in corporate governance research, in my own personal view. And I will split the two things between the new challenges, corporate governance research, and the old topic, which are evergreen. So let's start talking about the new challenges in corporate governance. The first challenge is comparative corporate governance, meaning that not only you study one country, one institutional setting, but in your paper, you try and compare and contrast at least 2 or 3 papers. So sorry, 2 or 3 countries. Sometimes you have 2 countries, you compare and contrast them. Sometimes you have 40 countries. And why is it relevant? And why is it a challenge? It is relevant because it helps us to address important research questions. And probably the most important one is the one I'm pointing this out now. How and to what extent country-level characteristics, institutional characteristics, and firm-level characteristics affect corporate governance practice? Because I do not buy the story that corporate governance is the same everywhere. It's not true. It's simply not true. Here I'm suggesting a paper for a very good friend of mine, Cagliari et al., Connecting the Dots. I think it's a very useful paper, especially, let's say, if you're starting your PhD or you are starting corporate governance, to give you a very broad picture of why country-level characteristics matter in corporate governance, why 2 firms can be very similar in terms of product, industry, may have very different corporate governance practice because they are embedded in different corporate governance settings. One of the major problems I see in some papers that I evaluate is that they use a setting, let's say, for Southeast Asia, for Egypt, sincere Egypt, and they assume it works like in the United States. So everything, the theory, everything in the data looks American, and then sample is not. There is no way that the American, that's my opinion, as I said, it's a very opinionated presentation in a sense. There is no way that what works in the United States works necessarily in other countries around the world. Because countries are very different. They have very different characteristics in terms of culture, formal institution, informal institution, way of doing business, and whatsoever, rule of law, whatsoever. So you need to take that into account. But that's an opportunity, because there is a great need from this kind of research. But also, it's also a challenge. Why? Because it is a challenge in terms of theory. It is a challenge in terms of research design. In terms of theory, you need to build multi-level theory. An example could be the so-called corporate governance bundles theory. That's Eduardo Schild, a friend of mine, and then some other co-authors. That's an example of a paper using corporate governance bundles, where basically you do not assume that the single elements of corporate governance work independently, like, let's say, board independence, let's say, executive compensation. They work independently. No, they interact with each other, and the outcome will be different depending on the characteristic of the institutional environment. So board independence in one country may work in one way, in another country will work in a different way, depending on the specific characteristics of the country. For example, I'm working on a paper now on 16 countries, which is the topic is independent director compensation, and then we're looking at how the regulation on director liability influence the way corporate governance practice in a different way in different countries. And that it's not only a methodological, we'll go back to that in a minute, but it is also a theoretical issue. I will just give you a glimpse now, but we'll go back to that later on. Some researchers think that agency theory is that theory to study corporate governance. I'm not underestimating the importance of agency theory. I have worked a lot using agency theory. It works in many situations, but it does not work everywhere in every situation. You need to take into account institutional settings. That means that, for example, in the paper I'm working, I'm using agency theory, but integrating it with institutional theory. So I'm assuming the agency problems may be different, and the agency relationship may be affected by different situations in terms of institutional characteristics. Because some countries are, for example, more market-oriented, other countries are more network-oriented, some countries have a stronger enforcement regulation, some countries have a weaker enforcement regulation, and so on. Culture and whatever. Multi-level theory means that you take into account that you integrate more than one theory, take into account not only the firm level situation, but also the country level situation. That's not only in theory. Then you have to, and that's the second important challenge, you need to address it in your research design. More and more studies are not simply running linear regression or non-linear regression like the object topic, sort of regressions, but if you're doing a quantitative study. But they're taking into account with, let's say, control variables like countries, like some country characteristics as control variables, but they try and develop a multi-level analysis. What do I mean by this? Two examples. One is moderators, and the other one is HLM, like hierarchical linear model or non-linear model, if you like, depending on your dependent variable. One choice could be like you choose moderators. They can either be at the country level, like some country institutional characteristics, or at the firm level. The assumption is that not all the companies behave, they may change their behavior depending on the country where they are. Or the second assumption could be like if you use firm level characteristics as moderators, could be that not all countries, not all companies in the same countries work in the same way. So there is a variety between the countries and within the countries in terms of corporate governance. So your study will not only estimate and examine the direct effect, variable board independence, for example, on a firm outcome, but we also look at the moderating impact on this relationship, or let's say country regulation, country's culture, whatever. Or if you use a moderator at the firm level, you will say that some companies that have specific corporate governance characteristics will behave differently in the same institutional environment. Because, let's say, board independence, CEO duality, board diversity, commitment to environmental and social issues, whatever. The second way to address it, which is probably, it's not like either or, because you can have moderator with an HLM analysis, is hierarchical linear regression model or hierarchical multi-level non-linear model, like logistic regression, which is hierarchical logistic regression. What do I mean by this? I mean that you take into account the fact that the single company, sometimes even the single individual in the company, in the study I'm doing, for example, I have independent directors. So in every company, there is more than one independent director. So the first level is the individual independent director, then you have the company, then you have the company nested in the country. So basically, with these kind of methods, you assume that observations are not independent from one another, but you also assume that they are nested in one another with different levels. And you are also able to estimate the extent that country-level characteristics explain corporate governance practice and the extent that firm-level characteristics nested in country-level characteristics affect corporate governance practice. You're able to estimate, to give values to that. So let's say, just for example, in some situations, country-level characteristics may explain 70% of the corporate governance practice, while firm level characteristics may explain 20%, and individual level in the board may explain 10%. That's an advance because it allows us to open the black box and do not assume that corporate governance practice develop in a vacuum, because they don't. We all know, if you have any experience in the real business, that companies do business differently in different countries, in different situations, in different companies. It is hard, it's not easy to do, but it is a huge opportunity. Do you hear me?
Yes, Professor.
Okay. So I have some strange sound in the background. What about national corporate governance? What I said about comparative corporate governance does not mean that we are unable to study corporate governance in a single country and still get published in an important academic journal. But we need to pass a higher threshold. Here are some questions that I think that's important to be able to answer before submitting a paper to an international academic journal in corporate governance. That's if you are studying single country. The first question, and then I also provide, this, as I said, is a very personal view, I also provide some answer in a way I did it. This is very personal, of course. That doesn't mean that that's the only way to do it, but I wanted to provide real life experience, which I thought was useful. The first question that you need to answer to yourself as an author is, why should an international reader be interested in corporate governance issue addressed by your paper? Why should we care about corporate governance in that country you are studying? Many times you're studying your own country. And of course, you're very interested in your own country because it is your country. But if you go into an international journal, you may have readers, reviewers, and editors from other countries as well. So that's the very first question. Why should an international reader care? Why should be interested in what I'm saying? That's an example of a paper I published some years ago now, but this paper was published on the Parmalat case. You probably heard the Parmalat case. There was a famous scandal in 2003. But I did not publish it with an Italian mindset. I use, of course, and that I think is a very good thing that you exploit your national background because you get the subtlety of this institutional setting. So I wrote it as an Italian author, of course, and then I had access to data, which will be very difficult to get to access if you're not Italian speaker, not living in Italy. But still, two things. The questions was very wide. Corporate governance failures. So why do companies fail in terms of corporate governance? And that's not an Italian question. That's corporate governance failure can be everywhere in the world. I'm sure that you can remember one corporate governance failure, if not more, in your own country. Now in the news, you have the Wirecard case scandal in Germany. But when I remember when I did a book with Creative Accounting Frauds, with many co-authors, with each of them working on a single country, the question was not finding cases of corporate governance failure, by deciding which of the cases to study, because there are so many. And then the question, as you say, is to what extent is Parmalat a particularly Italian case? And the answer was, no, it's not that much an Italian case. And that's why there was the reason why we got it published. It was obviously very timely. So timing is important. It was a qualitative study, case study. Data was important, so I have to dig in data, which was obviously very good in that. But the most important issue was I was able to persuade the reviewers and the editors that an international reader could learn from this. Although it was not, even if it was not interested in the Italian corporate governance, but it was something that you can learn from any background. The second question, I think, which is very relevant, is what is so unique and relevant in the institutional setting you're studying, which is somehow related to the first one, of course, but is more specific. So I think you should, either in your introduction, possibly in your introduction, or in your research setting, you should explain why it's so unique, why is it relevant? Because it needs to be unique and relevant. Because it's only unique and it's not relevant, who cares? You can be the only one who has something which is not relevant, so not worth studying. If this is relevant and not unique, some people may argue, so why are you studying in that institutional setting? Why are you not studying like in 20 institutional setting because it's more generable? That's an example I'm using, is the paper I just published some months ago in the European Accounting Review. The paper is on the continuity of the board of statutory auditors across the social, economic, and political institutional change. It is based again in Italy. So doesn't mean that you cannot publish in a single institutional setting. But why it was unique? Why was it relevant? It was unique for two reasons. The first reason is that the Board of Statutory Auditors is a governance oversight institution at the firm level, which is unique. The only Italian companies have it, and to some extent Japanese companies. That's it. So you cannot do this study in every other country. Okay. The second reason why it was unique, it is that it is a history paper. So we study from 1882, yes, 1882, until today, the continuity of this governance institution. And that's unique in a sense, because this governance institution, which is somehow similar to the audit committee in the United States, but it was mandatory for Italian companies over 80 years before the United States made it mandatory, okay? Almost 100 years before the Cagliari report suggested the audit committee in the UK. So that's a way to dialogue with the international audience, but to show them how unique it is. The second reason why we show was unique, because the Italian institutional setting was unique in terms of social, economic, and political institutional changes. So yeah, we are comparing, contrasting a continuity of a governance institution in comparison with the many changes in social, economic, and political. Just to give you an idea, Italy was monarchy, then a dictatorship under fascism, then a social democrat republic, then a liberal republic. So you have 4 political changes during the period analyzed. It started from being a rural, based on agriculture country, and then a very well developed country. Social issues changes. So that we explained what was unique. Then the question was, why is it relevant for an international reader? We did not try to persuade them about something we couldn't sell. We told them, basically, the reviewers and the editors, and hopefully the readers, that it is relevant because it shows how the reason why any governance institution can continue without any change, despite and across the social, economic, and political institutional changes. And that's a research question that nobody answered before. Some related literature was how do governance changes with the change in institutional settings. But we have showing that sometimes in some situation, for some reason, it doesn't change. So that's an example of how you can try and answer the question, what is so unique and relevant in the institutional setting you're studying? The third question, if you want, that I think you need to answer when you do national corporate governance and we want to submit a paper to an international journal, because obviously if you are submitting to a national journal, that's natural. You're doing national corporate governance, I submit it to a national journal. Of course they care. But in international journal, it's difficult. So how does it contribute to a better understanding of corporate governance? So in other words, what can we learn that we didn't know? That's another example of another paper I recently published. We recall to Jerome was my former PhD student at the time. Well, at the time we did it together. And then it's about compensation. That's another topic of research I like. But as you say, again, that's based on Italy as well, again, but as you say, the general question is very, very wide. Are optimal and managerial power perspective competing or complementary? And that's the question that can be of interest to an American scholar, to a UK scholar, to an Egyptian scholar, to a South Asian scholar, to a Norwegian scholar, to an Italian scholar as well. And then I provide evidence from the compensation of statutory auditors in Italy. Why should we care about the compensation of statutory auditors in Italy? I care, of course, if I'm an Italian, but if I'm an international reader, Why should I care? I don't have statutory auditors in Italy, in my country. So, because there are individuals in the board, somehow similar to independent directors, but with a major difference. They are only there to monitor, they cannot advise. So that allows us to exploit a very interesting question. How do you pay people in the boardroom that only monitors? Because sometimes in extra compensation, you have the advice issue to be considered. Independent directors, you have the advice and monitoring issue, so you cannot disentangle the two effects. Do I pay them this way because they are advisors or because they are monitors? Here, we can focus on that. That's what may be of interest to international readers. Are optimal contracting and managerial power competing on complementary viewers in a setting where I can disentangle advisory role and monitoring role? So to sum it up, I truly think that there is still place to study national corporate governance, but the threshold is higher, and you need to address these questions possibly before you start researching, because that you don't waste time going in a way that you find no solution. But importantly, when you write the paper, straight up into introduction, please explain me why should an international reader be interested, what is so unique and relevant, and how can you contribute to a better understanding of corporate governance. Other challenges in terms of theory now. As I said before, agency theory dominates corporate governance. It does dominate corporate governance theory, but also corporate governance practice. Most of the code of best practice and regulation are basically based on agency theory. However, there is an however. And that's probably the most challenging, but when you have a challenge, you also have an opportunity. To what extent can agency theory explain corporate governance outside Anglo-American countries? Because now we know that corporate governance works very differently outside the common issue like United States and UK, although there are also differences between United States and UK. So agency theory was developed by Jensen and Macklin, Fama, and so on in 1970s, 1980s, taking into account some specific institutional characteristics. To what extent can they explain corporate governance in other institutional characteristics? Here, what I would like to suggest, but that's my very personal view, something I do not like is when I read the paper on, let's say, Egypt, and the author assumes that Egypt is like the United States. Financial markets, way of doing business, it doesn't make any sense to me, okay? You need to truly exploit institutional characteristics. And let's go to the second question. How can you integrate agency theory with institutional theory? I think that's a very good way to use agency theory in other institutional settings, because you make explicit the fact that agency theory works, but it works differently in different institutional settings. So you can may want still to use agency theory, but please do, at least my advice, my opinion, to try and integrate to institutional theory if you're going and study outside the Anglo-American country. And if you are comparing and contrasting Anglo-American countries with other countries, I think it's very useful. Or, and there is a however, although agency theory dominates corporate governance, it's not the only theory. Which alternative meta theories can we adopt to explain corporate governance practices? There is a paper, for example, that I published a couple of years ago in the Journal of Business Ethics on green agreed on the environmental issues, environmental commitment, and CO pay, CO compensation. And there we did not use agency theory, but we used environmental stewardship theory. So we developed a theory which took into account stewardship and environment. So that was very original in the sense. That's what probably we were accepted for publication, because we took a very different view. Of course, with data to support the view, because you need data nowadays, otherwise it's only merely an opinion. Still, I think that's very important. That's a challenge. Again, I think that every challenge provides good opportunity. One of the most timely challenges that we have today is the integration between environmental, social, and corporate governance, the famous ESG. It was in the news. It's not only theory. It was in the news a couple of days ago when BlackRock, the major American institutional investors, said they had a blacklist of major companies that were not good in ESG. They are putting billions of dollars everywhere in the world as an investor. So, and that makes your research also policy relevant. And that's always good because it's easier to persuade the reviewer and the editor and the reader that your research is interesting when they also have practical implications. There's only some possible questions. I'm not saying that this is not a comprehensive presentation. For two reasons, I don't have the time. I would probably not be able to do it. How does firms' ESG affect corporate governance practice? So what's the link between environmental and social commitment, performance, disclosure, if you're an accountant, and corporate governance practice? How does a firm ESG affect corporate governance decisions, which is not necessarily corporate governance practice, but can be corporate governance decision, let's say, to other, it may be like innovation, business innovation. It can be something like an accounting decision, like research and development, expense, capitalized, any corporate decision. On the other side, that's more a finance issue. How does ESG investing, so those institutional investors were very focused on ESG, affect corporate governance? For example, I'm doing a study now where I have a look at the ESG reputational risk of a company. So what's the ESG reputation of the company, and how does it affect corporate governance practice of that same company? And we found some very interesting results, especially on international level. So ESG reputation is something which is relevant. Think about very famous example is Volkswagen some years ago, the diesel scandal. How did it affect Volkswagen? Or like the British Petroleum 10 years ago, the Gulf of Mexico spill oil. These are just a major issue. Or like in Italy, Atlantia, the Morandi Bridge, that collapsed. We made several people died. So how did it affect corporate governance? Another question which I think is relevant, should corporate governance be tied to sustainability? And if so, how? So what's the link between sustainability and corporate governance? And related to that, how should corporate governance solutions balance between different ESG elements? Because there may be contradiction between environmental and social issues, between governance and social issues, governance and environmental issues, for example. So how do you balance? How about, for example, let's try and be more specific. How should board of directors balance between the different ESG elements? These were like new challenges, okay? But still, you may also have a lot of opportunities using, let's say, old questions, but from new perspectives. I'm not going to tackle them all, but just go and have a look at two.
At what time? 9:10. 10 past 9.
Sorry? Okay. Oh, I'm not going to tackle them all, but I will just have a look at two potential old questions. One is related to ownership. Ownership is a foundation of corporate governance. It is an evergreen in corporate governance, okay? Every time I talk to my students, PhD or master students on corporate governance, I say, if you have a doubt, go back to ownership to understand the company. Who is the owner? How do they own the company? How do they control the company? Is it a family, institutional investor, whatever? The state, whatever. The other one is executive compensation. Executive compensation is again an evergreen, but it's difficult to provide new contributions, but there are a lot of ways to do it in effect. Let's try and have a look at it. Okay, now. Ownership. Here I'm just providing some interesting, I think, questions. What's the relationship between ownership heterogeneity and corporate goals? For example, how does the relative presence of different owner types, families, state, institutional investors, and institutional origins, Americans, you can have, the famous BlackRock, you may have a Greek family, or you can have a national family, or you can have a foreign family and a foreign institutional investors. How do they shape the corporate purpose and goals? Because there may be conflict of interest. It's not true that all owners have the same preferences. And how do board directors balance the interests of heterogeneous shareholders, for example? So how does board is able to cope with and balance those interests? Let's say where you have foreign institutional investor and a state-owned company, or a family-controlled company and foreign institutional investors. They may have different views, they may have different cultures as well. The other important relationship to be addressed still is ownership heterogeneity in corporate governance practice. Again, just an example of an important question. How do shareholders originating from principal-agent contact, typically the US or the UK, affect corporate governance in countries with principal-principal problems? So let's say, how does having a shareholder, institutional investor from the UK, affect corporate governance practice in a company in Italy, where you typically have a principal-principal problem? Also interesting, and vice versa. Because you can have, for example, a Chinese investor investing in the United States. As you say, it's not like that straightforward. It is interesting. Or you can have like a family, the royal family of Saudi Arabia that invest in American companies. They do. So how does it influence the corporate governance of the company? Even interesting is the relationship between ownership and corporate governance across different institutional contexts. So is it the same? How is it heterogeneous ownership structure affect corporate governance mechanisms in different countries? So you can have a look at ownership and control and the relationship with governance in different countries, and studying the differences like with multi-level or with moderating variables, as I said before. You can try and understand how much institutional setting influence this relationship. How you can find, for example, that family ownership is not necessarily a bad thing, especially in some countries. It could be a good thing. Or even state control could be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on the institutional context. Or having institutional investors could be a good in some institutional context, could be not very good or have different outcomes in other institutional contexts, depending on level of regulation, depending on rule of law, depending on culture, depending on economic development, whatever. As I said, compensation is an evergreen, but you still can add to it, but you need to be original in that. Just some ideas. Actually, some of them I'm working on it. In some other not, but the cool things still think could be interesting. CSR contracting, for example. What do I mean by CSR contracting? That's a relatively new issue. How and why do firms integrate corporate social responsibility criteria like environmental issue, health and safety, social issue into executive compensation? So we have plenty of literature on the integration of financial criteria into executive compensation with stock options, with bonuses, whatsoever. But the literature is very limited. I'm currently doing a study on 45 countries to study why do they do it. Okay, but still a very working paper. So I'm not presenting any result at the moment, but I think it's very interesting. And they do it for different reasons, of course. But that's a new area because there are very few papers around, and the practice is there. It's relevant because it's relevant from a practical view. So it's a real practice. So companies do it for a reason. It is worth investigating, in my view. The determinants, the attention, but also the consequence. What are the consequences of CSR contracting? So the integration of CSR criteria into executive compensation. Does it affect firm performance? Does it affect firms' financial performance, environmental performance? You see, and then you may have develop a lot of research ideas from this. And that's very trendy. Another important issue is executive compensation around the world. Again, it will be probably difficult today to develop the typical executive compensation study related to market shares, market value, share price, and say this, and that in a single country. Because it's difficult to add something. There is thousands of papers on this. So the first question would be like, oh gosh, another paper on executive compensation. I already read 10 last week. But you can add something which is very relevant and original. For example, to what extent do country level, firm level characteristics affect executive compensation? Then again, the interaction between country and firm level characteristics can be very interesting. Or you move it. You study compensation at the board level, but you don't study executive compensation. You study director compensation. You will be surprised. I was surprised some years ago when I started studying director compensation that if you Google it, there are thousands of studies of executive compensation. There are less than 50 on, well, even more, probably less than 20, I would say 20-25 studies on director compensation in major journals. Still, independent directors are very important. You know that every single corporate governance study will say how important are independent directors. Any code of best practice regulation will say how important are independent directors. We want to know how they are compensated for their work. And that's a much more new area. This is challenging for some reasons because you need to apply multi-level research because, of course, while you have only one CEO in a company, or generally only one, sometimes you may have two, but there are exceptions, you generally have much more than one independent director in the board. So you need to nest every single director with different unique personal characteristics within the same board and then the same companies whatsoever. But here are some easy questions, which are still interesting if you study director compensation. Which are the determinants of independent director compensation? Which are the consequences in terms of audit quality, in terms of accounting earnings quality, in terms of executive compensation, if you focus on a compensation committee or remuneration committee. And then again, the same question I did before is still very original because there are very, very few studies on this. Well, actually, now I gotta think of, there is probably, well, let's be prudent. There are no more than 5 published papers on, that comes up to my mind now, on independent director compensation that studied at international level, so with more than 2 countries. Still, there is like plenty of opportunity, a real land of opportunity to try and understand how and to what extent do country level, firm level characteristics affect these important company decisions. This is my last slide. Some opportunities. Let's try and be finished with a slide that can be practical. If those of you are already researchers in corporate governance, I think there are 2 opportunities. One, if you have a very, very well-developed paper, there's a special issue on corporate governance international review on ownership and corporate governance across institutional context. The deadline for submission is the 1st September 2020, so that's why you need to have your paper already well-developed. But this journal, we are looking for paper for any country, possibly international, so comparative countries, studying the relationship between ownership and corporate governance across different institutional contexts. That's the main purpose of this special issue. Deadline is some 6 weeks, basically, 1st September. Then, if your paper, you're researching a paper or you're already thinking about a paper, not starting even researching it, I'm organizing, together with the British Accounting and Finance Association at my university, July 2021, the 24th Financial Reporting and Business Communication Conference. We'll have a stream on corporate governance. Of course, we always have the typical streams on financial reporting, on non-financial reporting, like environmental reporting, business communication. And the deadline will be, we haven't decided the deadline because of the coronavirus situation. The deadline will probably be about March, but you can be informed about that because it will be idly advertised. So basically, if your paper is already ready for submission, the first one is an opportunity. If it's not ready, the second one could be an opportunity. Another opportunity if you're a researcher could be the Journal of Management Governance. We don't have, at the moment, a special issue on this, but we are taking in ordinary submissions from any country, any that trying and address relevant corporate governance questions. It is in English, of course, but you can have, it's a Springer, the editor is Springer in Germany, but we are open to any country at all, no discrimination. These are the opportunities, I think, that if you're a researcher, if you would like to be a researcher, so you don't have a PhD yet, and you're interested in a PhD, we're preparing a call at my university for 1 3-year scholarship for a full-time PhD from someone who is not graduated in Italy. So we want an international PhD candidate to come and study accounting issues, business issues, corporate governance, whatsoever. Of course, it will be on a competitive basis. The selection will be in September, and the call will probably open next week or sometimes before the end of July. And it will be fully paid, not only the tuition fee, but also the living expenses and whatsoever. So if you're interested, you just can contact me. Well, thank you very much. I think I'm done with the presentation. I hope I provide a glimpse of the new direction in corporate governance research. I hope that I generated some doubts, but that was the idea. and I hope that I will be useful for your research in the future, in the next future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Question, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, dear Professor Andrea Melis, for your contribution and your effort. Thank you very much. Right now, Professor Andrea Melis answer your questions. If you have any questions, you can open the mic and ask your questions. But please, after asking your questions, close the mic. Yes.
Hi, Professor.
Hello.
My name is Ashan, and I actually recently passed my Viva from University of Glasgow in PhD in accounting, and my research is in corporate governance. And I was exploring the governance and accountability issues in UK banking sector, and my PhD focus on the non-executive directors in UK banking.
Okay.
It's a very good presentation. You did a very good presentations today, and give us a very good idea about the future from the future publications point of view. About the questions I have, because when I was about the non-executive directors and the accountability issues in corporate governance, which is at the moment very hot topic in UK at the moment, because UK government is looking for this one, and especially about the new regulations, which is about the individual accountability, SMCR, which has been introduced by the Bank of England in 2017. And that regulation is asking for the individual accountability, and it is one aspect of my PhD project. And when I was looking the literature about the accountability, and especially the SMC about the regulations point of view, the regulation is talking about the accountability in a different aspect, but there is very limited literature about the individual accountability, which I use in the term in my PhD as a forced accountability. So about how should I use this thing for the future publications point of view?
Can I ask you, are you doing a qualitative or a quantitative study?
I did the qualitative, and I interviewed to the policymakers and the non-executive directors in the UK banking sector.
Okay, good. So that's right. It could be. I think that sometimes qualitative research allow us to address questions that we cannot address from a quantitative point of view. Also, another issue I didn't have the time to tackle is mixed methods. So using qualitative and quantitative data together, basically.
I actually did. I collected quantitative data. I was thinking to use the mixed method in my PhD, but due to time limitations, I just go for the I use only the qualitative data. But I have a lot of quantitative data.
Well, that could be interesting, because that could also be a step forward.
Yeah.
From your PhD thesis to actually a research paper, because then you can actually put the strength. There are some questions that are extremely difficult to answer. You can guess from a statistical relationship, okay? But if you do the interviews, you actually know, actual opinion, the real life. And then you can add the data, the statistical data, to make it more generalizable.
And
I think that could be very interesting. And banking is always an industry which is relevant to everyone, because all of us have, in some way, a relationship with the banking sector.
Yeah. And the professor, the one thing more, I just want to get the advice from you, because if I use the mixed method for the future publication, and if I want to approach the Journal of Corporate Governance and International Review, when I go through the different past papers, that journal used mostly the theories that was published in this journal was institutional, agency, and this type of theory. in my thesis, I used a different theory, which is a Bourdieu theory. So, and Bourdieu theory is mostly used in CPA journals. So, if we use this theory, so can I still approach this journal?
Yes, I mean, the answer to your question, yes, you can. I mean, my understanding, and then talking to the other editors, I would truly agree with it, is to be the research method doesn't matter as long as it's a good one. The theory doesn't matter as long as it explains the fact. What I mean is that you can use different theories, you can use different methods, as long as they are doing it in a very good way and they are the most effective one to explain reality. So the fact that you know what, sometimes why you see that you have many papers using one theory in a journal, because people don't submit other papers in the same journal. Because people like you, I'm not blaming you, because that's typical. Like, oh, I see that they publish that, so I will try and publish as well. And then some other will do it the same. When I was submitting my paper to European Accounting Journal, I'm using a critical accounting perspective there, because I'm using theory hegemony, okay, from Gramsci. And there was no single paper published in the journal using the theory. The usual suspect would have been CPA, okay, but we decided not to send it to CPA and try European Accounting Review because I thought it was more relevant in terms of topic. They didn't care that nobody used the theory in that journal. The theory was well accepted in the terms of course, you need to work on the theory a lot. You need to persuade me or anyone that you are using the theory properly, and that's a proper theory to understand the topic. So there are no like gatekeepers that will keep you out because you are using one theory or another. Hope you understand. I answer your question.
Thank you. Thank
You're
you,
welcome. Any other questions? Yes, there is one question. Ibrahim.
Hi, Professor. Thank you very much for this presentation in that one. And I just wanted to ask you about your opinion or about your opinion. I am about to start my PhD in Chemie Business School in Ireland, and my potential topic will be around executive compensation and corporate social performance. I intend to do like a comparative study between United Kingdom and Germany, given the differences in the institutional and ownership structures and the recent changes in both countries for corporate governance. And I just wanted to see if you have any ideas or anything that I could take as well or answer in my PhD.
From what you tell me, I think the topic is very interesting and very timely, because you're using an evergreen topic, salary compensation, from a comparative view, and then, I can easily, if I need to think about 10 institutional settings that can be easily of interest for anyone, are Germany and the UK. Okay, so that's not like impossible to sell. And then I think that because it's not only because they are relevant from an economic point of view, but also they are relevant from a corporate governance view. UK is a pioneer of corporate governance. Germany is the most important country in Europe, and also, as you know, is like at the center of another type of corporate governance, capitalism. Okay, the Germanic capitalism. So I think it's very timely. CSR issue, this issue, I think they are, as I said, they are new, but they are becoming more and more important in practice and in theory. So you could, when I talk about CSR contracting, for example, it could be something you might want to address, or you can try and understand whether there are different drivers for executive compensation. Hope I answer your question. Good luck for you, because I think it's a very timely topic.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, Professor.
Hello?
Hello. My name is Gökberk, and I have a question about corporate governance data.
Mm-hmm.
Assume that we are collecting a cross-country data, and as it is although neighbor countries, they have different approach on the corporate governance. For example, in some countries, the corporate governance committee is not mandatory. In some countries, it is mandatory. So when you apply this to your research, how would you apply that? For example, audit committee is of course mandatory in all, but corporate governance committee and risk committee, they are optional. But in some countries, in your data set, you have them and you have to apply this to your regression. On the other hand, there are some countries which has full independence in the corporate governance, while the others, they don't even have any corporate governance committee. So what type of a plan?
Go on, sorry.
What type of a plan would you conduct for these cases? Because now this is a problem I am facing for my regression analysis.
Oh, that's a challenge. Okay, that's why I said comparative corporate governance is a challenge. Data can be challenging. I give you an example of something I had to address. In research, I'm currently doing, actually under revision for a journal, in 16 countries. US data was very easy to get. UK data was very easy to get. Then got to Europe, continental Europe, it was somehow easy to get. So basically, what I had to do was combine data from data sets with data collected from annual reports. And sometimes we have to contact the company as well. And ownership data are sometimes the more tricky issue to gather in some countries, where in some other countries it's very efficient. I was surprised by the fact that, for example, Italian company are very, very good in disclosing the data on ownership, while Scandinavian countries are not so good, but that's something you learn. So basically, I spent 1 month looking at the annual reports of every single company, looking at contacting the National Stock and Security Commission. That's sometimes are very helpful. For example, we have a lot of help from the German BaFin, sorry, which is the German SEC. They gave us data that were not publicly available. You need to be creative sometimes, in the sense that you need to find multiple sources and triangulate them. Because, as you said, from one point of view, it's a good thing that there is a variety in the world, so it's diverse, so it's interesting to do it, but it is much more challenging. That's why, that's probably saying the most important thing, when I say that the threshold to do national research is higher in terms of publication, I basically mean that the threshold for doing comparative is lower. What do I mean by that? I mean that usually reviewers and editors are a little bit less picky because they generally understand the difficulty, because they are researchers themselves. So they understand the difficulties in doing what you're facing. I face it. Most research doing comparative corporate governance already face, so they know the problem. Okay. You need to find a way triangulating the data from different sources, be transparent, explain the problem. Okay. But they know you're gonna, it's not like running a regression with the top 500 US companies. You have the data on CompuStat. That's easy to do. There are another question?
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yes, I have. Can I ask my question?
Sure.
Okay.
When I submit my research proposal to get the admission for PhD, they told me why you choose the region for Saudi Arabia, for example. You think the result will be generalized? I don't know what is the correct answer for this question, or why, or what should I say about the selecting Saudi region, for example?
Well, that's I think you should go back to the slide when I said, try and find the answer to the 3 questions I provided to you. Okay, like, why should I care about Saudi Arabia? Of course, if you're from Saudi Arabia, of course you care about Saudi Arabia, okay, because it's your own country. That's given for granted. But why should I care about Italy because I'm Italian, but I live in Italy. Why should I care? So what is so unique? Why is it relevant? What can I learn from that? So choose a topic from that institutional setting that can be unique and relevant. Doesn't mean they could be generalizable in every situation, but should be interesting in every situation from everyone. So there might be some unique peculiarities that you will not find in Italy, for example, you will not find in the US, but can be still of interest. That's something you need to persuade them. Try and answer in the most honest way possible the 3 questions I gave to you. Why should, from an international, without thinking that you probably from that country, okay? So why should someone from not that country should care about it? What is so unique? What is so relevant? What can we learn from it?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Prof. Hello.
Can I ask
Leo,
a question, please?
Prof. Leo, you can ask.
Hello. Thank you for your nice presentation, first. And second, can you tell us about the recent consequences of COVID-19 pandemic and its relation with corporate social responsibility?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. Okay, because it has affected countries in a different way. There is actually a special issue from AAAJ in Australia about accounting and sustainability, accountability under COVID-19. So I think that I don't have an answer to the question. Okay, because I think it's too early to say that. But for example, one research idea I had, but was not able to address it because lack of data, is I think I'm an accountant. I think that COVID-19 provided an excellent situation to show to a non-accountant why accounting is relevant. Think about the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis. People were discussing how many people were dying of COVID-19, how many people were ill of COVID-19, okay? What was the definition of a death with COVID-19 or because of COVID-19? Okay, that's basically accounting principle and standards. How you measure an item, how you report an item, isn't it? They were discussing about different countries to be more or less transparent about the COVID-19 situation. Think about Russia, for example, or China. While, for example, Italy was probably too much transparent in a sense that we were extremely prudent, that anyone that died with COVID-19 was because of COVID-19. So there were different ways, different criteria to assume. But that's a very accounting issue. You can actually think about it. If you find the data, address it. Yeah, the role of statutory audit to do with COVID-19 with, for example, 2 other accounting issues which are somehow related to governance. Is, for example, how do you disclose the impact of COVID-19 for your company? Because bear in mind that some companies were badly affected by COVID-19, but from some companies it was a huge business, COVID-19. So and there was some evidence of creative accounting under COVID-19, for example. It was obviously a heterogeneous shock, nobody expected. So you can use it for a natural experiment.
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
Okay, thank you, Prof, for your quality presentation. However, there's one area I think you didn't share, perhaps maybe as it relates to the number of articles you review, and it's based on the area of corporate governance and managerial behavior. Managerial behavior in terms of risk. If you could look at the capital market in most African countries, most African countries' capital markets are often undercapitalized, and based on that, in terms of corporate financial policy, managers do face risk problem. So most corporate financial managers do take or do exhibit a kind of risk aversion and regret aversion in their corporate financial policy. And when they exhibit such behavior, of course, it affects their level of corporate governance mechanism in terms of reducing free cash flow and the likes. So my question is, do you think is a possible area in terms of looking at corporate governance and risk or managerial aversion in terms of risk and regret across institutions in Africa?
Well, I'm not an African expert. That's probably a question that Tiffany, the previous presenter, could have asked better than I do. Tiffany is also a good friend of mine. But in general, yes, it is a very timely and interesting topic. And I do think that Africa is a very interesting and diverse continent. So it is in a sense like Europe, because you take a continent, but you have so different institutional settings within the same continent that you can have very interesting comparative research. I'm not sure about the challenge with the data. How much data are available in terms of corporate governance in all African countries? Because I'm not an expert on that. But if they're available, I think they will be very interesting. I mean, I'm not African, and I will be
4 years. I think we can get up to 4 years data for many African countries, perhaps maybe using techniques like panel dynamic GMM, since we have a short number of years. Because my understanding is that most corporate governance do work effectively in capital markets that are strong. But in most capital markets in Africa, most of our capital markets are weak and, of course, are undercapitalized. So based on that, it equally affects the free cash flow in the firm and indirectly affecting corporate governance mechanisms.
Also, the rule of law, the level of regulation could be different, so that it could be affected as well. Yes, I think that if you have the data, I think that would be an interesting question to, especially if you are able to compare and contrast countries and companies in countries in Africa with very different levels of economic development, for example, culture. Of course, you have a variety, because if you take Egypt and South Africa, they are very much different in many sense, for example.
Okay.
So yes, I do think it is of interest.
Okay. Thank you, Prof.
Professor Melis. Yeah,
Hello?
Professor Melis, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Yeah, I would like to ask you, this is, I think, is a critical issue in corporate governance research. It relates to the methodology side, the issue of endogeneity. You see, my experience in submitting papers is that, there are different journals and different reviewers, and they say, they come back with reviews of different comments about how to tackle the endogeneity problem. For example, like I submit a paper, I use the GMM method, then, I submit to one journal, the journal reviewer said that the GMM method is insufficient, and then when I go for another journal, they say another thing, so some journal reviewers say GMM method is sufficient, some are not. So how do we resolve this problem, in the long run, to tackle this problem of endogeneity? I know robustness is important. We use OLS, fixed effect, random effects, and of course the GMM as well. And I think also there's another new one I read from a paper, the control function method. I'm not sure whether you heard of it. So how do we actually solve these endogeneity issues, in a solid manner?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. I could answer the question in two ways. One could be an arrogant approach, and one could be an honest approach. The arrogant approach could be giving you a very difficult answer, difficult to understand, and then telling you that I know the solution. Okay. The most honest approach to this question that I will choose is that I do not think that there is a 100% solution to the endogeneity issue. That's my personal view. Okay. Unless you have natural experiment, which is not easy. Well, COVID-19 provides, I think, an excellent natural experiment, okay? But in normal circumstances, I don't think you can answer it 100%. What I would do, but it's my very personal view here, okay? I'm not saying everybody would agree with it, is using both theory and statistics to address it. So do not only use statistics and econometric methods, but use theory first to justify, for example, the instruments, to justify the situation. So what the way I spent the last 2 months trying to address an endogeneity issue, okay, between compensation and firms' reputational risk. Okay, I use theory, I use statistics. I think that I address it, but as a caveat, I put it as a limitation as well. Because honestly, I don't think unless you have an exogenous shock, you can handle it 100%. That's my view at least. But if I'm the reviewer, I would appreciate the fact that the author tries to address it rather than pretending it does not exist. But it's also honest in the fact that you cannot address it 100%. So basically, do your best, do different alternative techniques, use theory, but if you are not 100% sure about the situation, it's unlikely you will be honest, that say, I did my best, it doesn't appear to be a problem, but I cannot rule it out as a problem. So that's typical in any single corporate governance study, apart from very few ones. Some are more effective than others, of course. That's why I suggest using theory. Because some theory tells you that A causes B and not vice versa. Okay? So you can strengthen using also theory. It's a difficult question to answer. Okay, so I was honest on that. I don't think there is a perfect solution. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't study corporate governance. That's not the answer to it. That's not the solution to the question. Okay, avoid endogeneity because there is endogeneity. Hope I answered the question.
Yes. Hi, Professor.
Hello.
Hello, Professor Melis. First, I would like to thank you about this valuable session. And I want to ask about one of the topics you discussed, the ESG reputation. Can I ask you, please, to suggest a measure for corporate reputation other than marketing surveys, other than the published indices? So could you please suggest an accounting measure for corporate reputation?
Well, we're not actually using an accounting measure. What we're using is a media measure. So we're using a data set called rep risk, which is used by institutional investors, including, for example, BlackRock, so important institutional investors, including Norges investment bank. And basically, what they do, they use an algorithm and big data approach to search for any newspaper, any media, international level. They think they have 80,000 sources around the world. And then they calculate it for you dynamically. That means every month you have a data for the corporate reputation. It is a measure of reputational risk, okay, but still, reputational risk is still a measure of corporate reputation. It is at international level, so you have a variety of companies around the world. I think I'm using it in a couple of studies, and I think it's very interesting because it is better than doing a survey. Because the problem with the survey is how do you contact the people, how many people will reply to you. If you ask the company, they will always say they are good in some way. because they sell the product. Okay, they sell themselves as a reputation. So we're using the, I will put it in the chat so that you can find it. We're using this data set. This is a Swiss provider, but it uses international level. Hope I answer your question.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor.
Oh, you're welcome. Any other questions?
Hello, Professor. Hello, Professor.
Hello.
I have two questions, please. The first one, you said during your speech that publishing an international paper on a highly ranked journals from a sitting outside US, for example, from my home country, Egypt, needs to provide something is new, as you said, what is so unique and relevant. I know what is meant by unique, but I didn't get you about relevant. It doesn't make sense for me. So kindly clarify it for me. This is my first question. The second question, as an editor in one of the top journals, does the wording of the paper matter for you? I specifically mean here, if I have both unique and relevant idea, but I can't market my product with, let us say, innovative vocabularies. Does it a crucial matter for you? And if so, what's your advice for us? Because English is not our mother tongue. Thank you.
Okay. I will start with the first question, then we answer the second question. What do I mean by relevant? Meaning that it is of interest to a for someone not from your country, which is not particularly interested in your country. So, I mean that it is something, there must be something that I can learn and find of interest, even if I'm not a fan of particular interest in your specific country. So let's say that, I'll give you the example of the paper just published because it's the most recent one I have in my mind. It is a governance history and accounting history paper on Italy. Okay, I'm pretty sure not the editor, 100% the editor was not Italian. Okay, I am pretty sure none of the two reviewers were Italian, given the question, some of the questions they were asking. The fact they were interested in is that they was unique, and they accepted that. Okay, because I was able to explain why it was unique. It was really unique. But also, I explained what they could learn from it. So, is it something that you can show that I can find of interest? Interesting in the sense I can learn it. I can tell my companies what happens. I can, if I need to invest there, that's something important to know. Okay, these kind of things, because you need to use the uniqueness in a way to dialogue. Because if you're only unique, you say, I'm unique, I don't want to speak to anyone. That's not relevant because now they will speak to you back. So I'm unique, but I show you that I'm providing. It's like, let me do a comparison. Okay. There is a lot of talk about board diversity. So why diversity? Not only gender diversity, any kind of diversity is interesting in the board. But diversity per se is not a value unless people talk to each other and they bring the uniqueness and bring the benefit from their uniqueness. Otherwise, the bubble tower diversity. So you need to show a way, why should be interesting in that? Okay, what can you learn? Usually, when I talk to my PhD who are Italian, the first thing I say, okay, you want to study Italy, fine. Why? Because you're Italian, of course. So you find Italy is interesting. But if you were from Nigeria, why should you care about Italy? So what's so interesting in Italy? And then you need to find, and then I ask them to write half a page, about 500 words. Why is Italy interesting in this specific topic? So what can we learn from Italy that we cannot learn from other countries, of course? Actually, that's something you will be surprised of. That's something I ask for the United States as well. why should you study United States rather than another country for this specific issue? Of course, studying United States is easier, but not for all the issues. The second question related to language. I'm not an English native speaker either, so I know the challenging. Okay. Usually, I do it 3 ways. The first way is asking writing the paper, reading a lot of other papers, so that you know the jargon of the journal, the style of the journal. Some journal write in a very easy way, some journal write in a more complicated way. Do not translate it from your own language to English. English is a very easy language. Unless I think it's the same for you. I have the feeling, but that's a feeling, as I said, when I write from Italian is much more complicated. We tend to like long wordings, very long sentences. So when in doubt, keep it simple. So few use full stops a lot, okay? So keep it. Then, if you have the chance to work with a native English speaker, use that opportunity. So ask them to revise. They will not revise all the paper because it's demanding and time consuming. I can revise some wordings, okay? And then, but that will be, of course, a little bit more expensive. There are proofreading services. Actually, I only use it once, the proofreading services, so it doesn't. And then also in that situation, you may ask them not to revise all the paper, but only revise some specific parts of the paper. The more general answer is that some journals can be more picky than others for style. Some journals will not reject it unless it is understandable, okay? But it needs to be understandable. Some journals are more picky than others in that. So those are the more international, but not international in terms of institutional settings, but in terms of authorships. So do check, for example, in the previous 3 years, how many non-English speaking authors from non-English speaking university published there. Okay, that's a way to understand how, because of course they can be very international. They have authors from the UK, US, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand. Come on, they're all native English speakers. Okay, so that doesn't matter. Did I answer your question?
Okay, thank you. So I have to just clarify my idea without complex structure or innovative vocabularies?
No, keep it simple.
Okay, thank you. Thank you,
I would
Professor.
keep it. I mean, the more you can keep it complicated only if you are extremely good at English. But even I can read, for example, the accounting review. It is extremely easy to read the accounting review. It's usually written in a very easy way.
Yes.
AOS is a difficult issue, okay, but there are critical CPAs, critical accounting is a different issue. So they tend to write in a more complex way, but generally speaking, they are easy. So keep it as easy as possible. In doubt, put a full stop. That's what I would do, at least.
Thank you, Professor.
I think that you have done very well with answering a lot of questions there, Professor Andrea Melis. So thank you very much. And so all that remains for me to say is thank you everyone that's joined us, and I thank you very much for taking the time out to present to us today, Professor Andrea Melis. It's been really appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for attending the seminar. We appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have a good day.
See you soon in Egypt, dear Prof.
Oh, hopefully, yes.
Yes, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Please
Professor,
share.
for the presentation.